Like the thingy.
Click,
Yeah,
click.
you should
What's
get
up,
one of
Ross?
those.
Yeah, click. Hey everyone. Thank you for joining Power Hour here. I'm Pete Kazanjy. We're gonna get started in a hot second here. But we'll let kind of folks trickle in here to start. But Ross, before we get jamming on our content here, any big travel plans coming up? I know that you're in San Francisco right now, and you're gonna be flying back to the Great White North, but any trips upcoming? Any kind of customer visits, anything like that?
Yeah, it's actually been a busy last month and the next month similarly. So I was in Belize for a good friend's wedding about 3 weeks ago, and
Wow.
then um, visited a friend in Honduras on the way to SF for this last 2.5 weeks, and then back to Toronto for a week. And then one of my best friends is getting married, and instead of doing just a small celebration for his bachelor party, we are all going out to Greece. Um,
Oh, that's a
Casual, right?
low, low, low overhead bachelor party. Hey, do you guys want to go to Vegas or Austin and New Orleans? Well, I was thinking Mykonos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, how did you know? That's exactly where we're going.
Oh,
So yeah, getting my points back from the last couple of years.
make it up for lost time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, we'll get started here, folks. As I said, welcome to Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. Just kind of like to note for everybody, while folks are kind of trickling in, this is a really we try to make this as interactive as possible. So we really want people using the chat, using the Q&A panel. The purpose of Power Hour is to answer questions, right? It's not to we're not going to be doing a presentation or anything like that. It's to really answer your burning questions. We had a bunch that were submitted ahead of time, but if you have something that pops to mind that you want to ask me, ask Ross, etc., for us to kind of get our perspective on, that's what we're here for. We're going to be here for the next 58 minutes doing exactly that. So for folks that are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros, and MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related disciplines. And so the community's mission is pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer questions that they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about, just in general, be better at what they do. And so the way that we do that is through a number of different types of content. We do great live sessions like this. I promise you it will be great. We have a robust online forum that's for asynchronous Q&A. And then we have banging in-person events that we're doing more and more now. So for those who were not previously admitted, we're going to add you to the community. I guarantee you're going to like it. And so before we get started, just a couple of reminders here. So Power Hour is a pretty unique format. It's not a specific piece of content that we're going to be talking through. Rather, we're going to be picking the brain of whatever revenue leaders we have live here. And just, you're here to learn. This is rapid fire Q&A. So please do ask your questions, use the chat, use the Q&A. All the options work. So with that, let's go ahead and head into some introductions here. I'll make mine fast. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I am the co-founder and CRO at Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers, use metrics to improve team performance. I'm also the founder of Modern Sales Pros. But most of you probably know me because I've been around the block, kind of vocal. You might not know Ross here. Ross, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and Accord?
Yeah, sounds great, Pete. So Ross, CEO and co-founder of Accord, which helps sales teams win more deals and help onboard customers faster through a collaborative workspace. Also been working on Accord the last 2.5 or so years, but before that, spent about 5 years at Stripe as one of the first business/sales hires when we decided to move from a pure product-led motion to adding scary word sales. So went from
No. Excuse me. That's growth. Okay, we don't use the
Oh,
S
sorry.
word
Yes.
around
No,
here.
actually, my title wasn't sales. I did growth. We did growth there. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
We did
my! I was
growth.
just talking. I was making. I
I
was
think
like
I would add
making.
my title
I was
sales
making.
there.
I was making an obnoxious joke. That was actually your title was growth. Oh Jesus, of course.
No, I don't know what the title was, but externally, yeah, with customers, we wouldn't say so. Yeah, it's a dirty word there. But,
Oh,
at the time, now
at the
they have
time.
like a global sales team. So yeah, started as one of the first couple folks actually talking to customers, moving off user voice and Zendesk to actual Salesforce and email, which was a fun experience. So happy to chat about that, or kind of the experience of founding and starting to spin up the sales org at Accord, where we have a lot of these types of conversations, talking to Series A, B, C companies about how they go from 2, 3 reps, 10 reps to a lot more, similar to what you guys help companies do, in just a bit of a different way at Atrium.
Yeah, I mean, we had a really great, we can get started here. So Ross, thanks for introducing yourself. I think you and I actually just did a really fun masterclass on scaling early stage startups the other day. I know that like you guys' ICP right now is like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 reps, kind of in that like sub 10, sub 20 organization. What are some of the most important things that you see at that stage of moving from like founder-led selling to kind of like abstracted out multiple reps? Like, what are the biggest kind of important things for people to do? What are the biggest like pitfalls for them to look out for?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting things and opportunities at this stage, but a lot of challenges. So some of the things that I think on the opportunity side is you don't have to necessarily do everything in like the most scalable way. Like you can have the CEO or a Pete jump in on calls, or myself, and
Yeah,
help out. You can have product discussions, and I really think teams should be leaning into this way of selling. If you're going to be one of the buyers of the first, one of the first 100, 200 customers of something that's new, that isn't just like what you've done in the past, I think it's really important to make it, kind of bring in that partnership type approach to deals, especially if you're pushing up that ACV and they're potentially your next largest deal, or one of the, one of those opportunities. But I think you need to balance that with, hey, you're moving from having, the CEO or that first sales leader lead deals to actually having reps close them. So this fine line of, yes, you need to pull in the team and you need to make everyone feel special, because they are special, because they're a significant part of your revenue and your team, and you shouldn't pretend that they're not. But at
this deal right here represents a 10% lift in the number of customers we might have, going from 10 to 11.
Exactly. So you need to make sure you're not, like, yes,
Bring
you
the
want to
love.
seem bigger than you are and all this kind of stuff, but you need to bring that white glove treatment to every deal and every opportunity, because it is a needle mover versus being that series, BCD company. But at the same time, you need to be thinking about, how do we get other people to do this, and maybe in a more repeatable way? So that's something that I find really exciting about this kind of Series A, Series B stage, where you are doing a lot of special things. You are, partly building the product with customers and, making them feel super special, unlike, being another one of, Drifts or Snowflakes or whatever companies, customers.
Yeah.
But you need to also make sure that works for not 1 or 2 reps or 3, but like the first 5, 10, 20, 30, et cetera. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we think a lot about.
I'm going to drop a link. Eduardo dropped a link on that masterclass that we did on scaling early stage organization. And I just dropped the deck that I present at conferences, and venture funds have me present it to their portfolios to like scare people straight. Like, you have to do sales, founders. You can't just like mail it in. But I think that what you hit on, one of the things you mentioned there that really resonates with me, is this notion of like bringing the house, right? But doing it in a way where, like, as you like bring the house, right, like, smother the customer with love, smother the prospect with love, etc. Recognize that like patterns that then occur, and then document them off.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it can't, like, because what you're doing is you're doing continuous innovation on the sales motion. And then and that's really like important and powerful work. And so the worst possible thing you could do is have that like work go
yes,
like off into the ether.
We've already seen that happen with some of the stuff that we do, right? It's like, hey, this special note that you send to the VP of sales in our process, or I send to CEO. Okay, the next rep, now they're going to have to come in and they're going to have to learn how to draft that, instead of, hey, here's the 3 templates to the different stakeholders that you send from these people. That's a great example of, yes, you're doing these one-off things that become the process. You iterate, you figure out what works, and you don't want to reinvent the next day, the next week, the next month.
Yeah, totally. And so this is something that I talk about quite a bit in my book, and also that deck right there, which is like, when you're doing that founder selling, And also when you're doing that like baby sales team selling with 2 or 3 or 4 AEs, you're like laying the tracks down for then the next 5 AEs, 10 AEs, 20 AEs, etc., to make it as easy as possible for them to come on board and like not have to like relearn everything, or sorry, it's not relearn, it's rederive everything. It's way easier to like learn an existing motion that has been declared than it is to like derive a new. And actually, this is one of the things that we see a lot at Atrium, is because we have like 250 customers at this point. You see very substantial differences in the speed of ramp of reps in organizations that have very well declared sales processes versus ones where they're just like osmotically declared, or sorry, not even declared. It's just like, oh yeah, it's like tribal knowledge, man.
Yeah,
Right?
these
Like
are Salesforce stages, and this is the value prop, and here's the
that's it.
here's the
Have
one
fun.
pager, and you know what to do. You know how to get on a call. You know how to do a discovery thing. You know how to do a demo, right? It's like, well, there's a lot more that you've learned, like that we're talking about, that you've learned from the CEO selling than the first seller and those reps. And it's funny because the thought that came to me is, you don't just see this, I think, with and you're probably the same thing on your side. Like, you don't just see this with those initial sales teams. You see this when you're opening up mid-market or enterprise or a new
there's new behaviors.
Every 3 to 6 months. You should be selling in a completely different way if you are building new product, if you are building your space in the market, all those kind of things that should be
new recipes
changing. Yeah, new recipes.
It's not completely new. I would argue against that.
Yes.
Yeah, well, essentially what ends up happening is it's like adding a module, right? Like, I'll give you an example. So Atrium's ICP is like, Atrium is really great for any organization. Like, if you got like, 5, like SDR plus AE is like equal to or greater than 5 all the way up to like 300, like Atrium's really great for you, right? And so, but within that, there's actually quite a few different types of personas, right? There's like the little baby sales organization. There's kind of like the medium sales organization. There's like a 100-person sales organization, and those folks like kind of buy differently. And so one of the things, we're a big Accord users because one of our AEs, Sean, is deliciously organized, and so what we do is like we actually have our sales playbooks like declared in a stepwise fashion. We used to have it in like a Google Doc and like a Lucid chart. I made it in a Lucid chart, which is like obviously very usable for reps. It's not very usable for reps. And so now we have it just like documented out. And so what ends up happening, we actually have different playbooks for like, we've got like the baby sales organization playbook versus the big dog sales organization playbook. And then like within the big dog one, like a great example, I've had 3 calls with like VPs of sales and CROs this morning, right? One in Montreal, one in Tel Aviv, and like one in Bend, Oregon, because it's essentially just like an executive alignment meet and greet, down funnel touch, right? It's like not selling at all, because again, when you're an early stage company,
the no ask play, which I think is fantastic, and I think very few reps are going to set those up unless you build it into your playbook.
There's a step right here.
You're going to do it when the deal's not going well, right? And how do you maximize? How do you change the percentage points, right? So say your win rate, you're doing well, your win rate's like 35%. You keep on adding these little things to it. All of a sudden, you're going to be able to, notch that up.
Yeah, for sure. And like if that just kind of like goes, if you have some reps that are doing it and other reps who are not, what you want to have is like systematization, right? And like this is one of the things that we talk about with our customers a lot, is that you can reveal where reps are having more success, because like once you get to like 5 reps or like 10 reps or whatever, you're going to actually have natural people who are like outperformant as compared to others. You're like, whoa, this person's win rate's like way higher than everybody. Not way higher, it's like 25% higher than, like, this person's at 25% instead of 20 for everybody else. What are they doing? Or like, hey, this person's ASP is like, and so then being able to inspect and say like, yo, what are you doing different here? Oh, I do this thing where I like send them XYZ, and it's like, oh man, well, like, just slot that into the sales playbook so like nobody misses that. Yeah, I think that an important thing for people to remember is like, as you're kind of like iterating your sales motion, you can't just like go off into the ether. It's got to be like recorded in a way that folks will be able to use it later on. I imagine you see this with your your organizations, right? Like probably the people who follow the Accord playbooks end up having higher win rates than like reps or teams that don't adopt as heavily.
Yeah, we see the folks that love this process and iteration because they're doing it themselves daily. It's not just like, oh, I'm really good at talking to people, so I'm the top rep. It's usually like, hey, I think about things in this fashion. I think about changing the way that I'm approaching these conversations, and they build it into their own process. I think the challenge that why I built Accord after my experience at Stripe, the challenge is, how do you get those things to the rest of the team and not just share, but actually get them to adopt those new behaviors? Which I'd be interested in hearing how you guys do that with Atrium and the product with your customers. But I think one of the things that we see is it needs to be in front of them. You're never going to have a rep change their behavior because you changed your Salesforce stage or the exit criteria on some internal documentation. And this is what we tried.
That never, exactly. Like
so
often Google Doc or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's this thing. Oh, I'm in mid deal cycle with this customer, and I'm gonna go back to the
you know what I should
page.
do? I should go over to that Notion page, like 10 deep. That has to be in work. It has to be in workflow.
Yes, it has to be in workflow, and that's the thing that we're trying to do, because like you said, there's things that you can do, like that late stage executive alignment call when the deal is going well, not poorly, that you want to add in. How do you get the 6 other people that aren't doing it on the team to do that thing? It is almost impossible if it's not in front of them and the customer during the sales process.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have a pretty muscular success motion that kind of speaks to this. So a couple of ways that we kind of get stickier and help people is one, in a pre-sale environment. I think there's one thing that you can do as a sales organization, which is think about how you can deliver like real, like tangible, like I can touch it, I can taste it, value as early as possible. And obviously like product-led growth is a good example of this. Now, not everybody, unfortunately, like has the engineering resources, or like not every product can actually like support a PLG motion. In Atrium's case, one of the cool things is like it takes like 5 minutes to set up an Atrium account. So it's like you Salesforce connect, and actually that's what our account executives do, is they have discovery conversations that are like, it's like the first 15 minutes is discovery conversation. The next 5 minutes is like turning on an account for the person. Then they reconvene in like 3 days, and they kind of go through their like that organization's data that they actually haven't had visibility into historically. Now all of a sudden it's right there. It's like, oh, cool. You were really worried about these like 3 rampers right here. Well, like 2 you don't have to worry about, but this one right here, yeah, you were right.
You can do that after the first call.
Yeah. So we just turned it on, and this is why our AEs are lined up around this. So that's the first thing, is like the oh wow, and then but like oh wow is cute and important, but then like embedded is vital. And so the way that we do that is like we cribbed this from, there obviously like there's like the superhuman onboarding or whatever, which in our case, like everyone knows how to do email, and it's like kind of hard to like, email is just a torrent that kind of comes at you and continually reminds you to like use superhuman or whatever. In our case, what we do is we actually have like we call it Atrium University. So we have a 3-step process that we do with every sales manager, right? So Atrium is priced on a manager basis, like managers, leaders, or whatever, like regardless of how many reps you have. And so each manager has like 3 meetings with their customer success manager. It's a very heavy CS motion, but
before they're sold or after they're sold?
After, post-transaction. And so the whole idea there is to align resources in Atrium to the use cases that have been identified. Like, oh, you have a bunch of reps that are ramping. Let's get you some ramping resources here, like some views that are set up, and let's weave it into your operating rhythm, right? And so when I think about like things that you guys do, I could imagine like from a customer success onboarding standpoint, or even in a pre-sale environment, you could totally take what would be a undeclared, like organic, sales playbook. Hey, where's your sales playbook declared? Oh, it's in my brain. Right. And like you guys could declare it out in an Accord and be like, cool, does that kind of like look like what your sales playbook? Oh, well, yeah, cool. Would you like to keep it? You should buy it. Right. And then moreover, one of the things that we now do as well is we actually have validation rules on our opportunities, where in order to get above a certain percentage from a probability standpoint, there's an Accord hyperlink text field or URL field where like the rep has to put the cord summary page hyperlink in there, or else Salesforce goes, eh. And
that makes my heart happy. Not as an ex-sales rep, but but as
right,
someone who
but
wants to drive these changes and the outcomes, and and then I think hopefully you have those aha moments as the rep when you start doing these things, right?
yeah, for sure. But I think that this is something that we could all, as sales leaders and sales operations people, think about, is like, how do you weave these things into process? Because otherwise, like, the Jocko talks about this, Jocko van der Kooi from Winning by Designs talk about it all the time. Like, look, it's not like one and done transactions are dead. Like, it's gone, right? So you have to get people to success. You have to make sure that they're consuming. You have to make sure that they're engaging. I was talking with a rep on a one-on-one about this yesterday. It's almost kind of like, if you're not expanding, it's like Ricky Bobby, like if you're not first, you're last, or whatever. Like if you're not expanding, like, and you're static, that's actually a kind of a scary place to be in, because like you always want to see growth within the account to like incremental use cases or whatever, or like you're in a tenuous situation. So I think it's a really powerful thing for like all of us to think about, even though we might say, oh, well, like that's CS's role or whatever. It's like, cool, man. Well, like, do you want expansion revenue? Because I think that probably goes to your bottom line, Mr. or Ms. Sales Leader. Yeah.
Totally.
What do you guys do around kind of like weaving and embedding to make sure people are getting to more success?
Well, do you want to hit? I just saw this question come up from John. Do you want to hit that real quick, and then?
Oh, I missed it. I have the chat up and not the Q&A
Oh,
because I'm a
good.
goofball.
We got John
Uh,
Kent.
oh yeah. Fire away, Ross.
How
Please
many
answer.
logos would you recommend a founder or VP of sales acquire before hiring reps? Okay, so if you're the founder, you were brought on to kind of build that out. On behalf of the founder, how many logos? I would go to probably looking at, as Pete says, ASP, like average sale price, as a
Yeah,
big indicator of that. Because I
sure.
mean, if it's a massive enterprise, that's a 200, 400K deal or something like that, too. Like, those one
Yeah,
or two of those things, like, got a lot of validation, got a lot of work to do there. And then figuring out the next one, you probably can have someone dedicated to it if you're the founder, because you're probably taking care of that two massive logos that you're dealing with and product and everything else.
yeah,
If it's more of a mid-market motion, let's say like 20K to 50K or something like that, maybe 5 to 10 of those deals knocking down, start to think
yeah.
about bringing on someone. And then, I mean, if it's more product led or really small, you probably can handle a lot more. And you're probably investing in that go-to-market sales motion after more product and CS. But curious to get your take on that, Pete.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I think those are really good rules of thumb that you just described. The way that I would describe it is like, once you start getting the sense of repeatability,
Yeah.
right? Once they're like, hey, I kind of see the patterns here, right? Kind of like once like the Venn diagram starts like overlapping, you're like, oh, okay, cool. I can kind of see how like most of these deals are like ought to go down. I think the exception there is going to be balancing against how much time it is. So like, if you have a multi-$100,000, the only way you can sell is multi-$100,000 or like very large ASPs, then then closing a handful of those is like, unless you're going to sit around and wait 3 years, which probably seems undesirable, you're going to probably want to do more. Now, and in fairness, this is kind of one of the reasons why, like, I'm not a huge fan of really high ASP sales motions in a startup environment. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some markets and solutions where like it can only be that way. Kind of like, hey, we're Workday and we're going to go after PeopleSoft or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, cool. You should like start with the thin edge of the wedge. It's like, no, this is an ERP, like, HRIS ERP solution for like large organizations. Like, guess what? That's the problem we're solving.
Yeah.
But if you can somehow figure out how to compress those deals, it's like sell to smaller organizations or kind of compress the unit of value in some sort of capacity, then your cycle time will be faster. And so like a faster cycle time will get you more information. You'll start seeing more repeatability.
Yeah.
It's like less risk. It's more of a numbers game, et cetera. So yeah, that's how I would kind of think about that. Good question. Good question, Kent.
Any
Ross,
other questions? Yeah, well, I answered the other one. I just wanted to make sure we get, since I know we got like 26, 7 people on here. If there's any other questions y'all have for Pete or myself.
yeah, keep them coming,
How do
please.
we, yeah, to your question, how do we build and embed some of these best practices and things as we're
Yeah,
learning them? I think templatization. So I mentioned this earlier in terms of like, hey, that example executive note, like being able to templatize these things. And what I always thought about as a rep was, how can I spend more time thinking about what I'm working on, the project with the customer, and not thinking about sales process? Like, I love sales process because it helps me think about, it's kind of, it's kind of counterintuitive thing. It's like, I love sales process because it helps me be present with my customer and the problems
yeah.
that we're
You don't
solving.
have
And
to worry.
that's,
You don't have to worry about remembering that.
yeah, I don't want to think
It's
about
right
that
here.
stuff.
Here's the swim. Here's the
Yeah.
swim lane.
And personally, and it's funny because I think a lot of reps are insulted by or annoyed by managers and people coming in. I love that stuff. Hey, like, let's not, I don't want to think about, like, give me the copy paste stuff. I was in love. The first tool that I fell in love with as a sales rep was Text Expander,
Oh yeah.
because, hey, this is the thing that I'm sending after every single call. So that's one thing that I think a lot about with our team. And how can you make reps more efficient, and how can you increase those win rates, other stuff like that. Try to templatize the things that happen every time, so then you can get really creative about the opportunity and the problem that you're specifically working on with a customer. So that's, yeah, so one thing that we do a lot of is like, hey, when a lead writes in and we want to actually say something instead of wait for the call to increase, the meeting bookings rate, the calls that actually happen, and the quality of that conversation, hey, send the same freaking note. Hey, great to chat. This is what I'm thinking about us talking about. What about you? And that shouldn't be a note that is written every single time. Yes, maybe look at their LinkedIn
Like,
profile, look at the company, add a line about it, but that should be the same thing with the call after. I shouldn't be structuring and formatting my bullet points and my sign off, but I want to spend more time on what those fill-ins are, right? So you
yeah,
can
exactly.
maximize the customization. And it's, again, very counterintuitive. I think people lean way too much. I think process breaks down when you lean way too much on the automation. And I think people really struggle for that right balance. And you see this in outbound campaigns. You see this in sales process. When
Yeah.
people think process, they think fully automated. And there's perfect balance in between where you make it about the customer with that extra time. So that's
Yeah.
what I think about.
Kat has a really good question here about like, hey, what's a good strategy for getting the objective playbook versus every rep's own opinion about playbook, because that's how they do it. I think in general, the latter thing, right? Every rep's opinion about the playbook because that's how they do it. That's usually an indication of like an undeclared and undocumented playbook. Where if you've ever watched like 4-year-olds play soccer or like 5-year-olds play soccer, where they just kind of like run all over the place and like, run after the ball, as opposed to like actually running a play, like I pass to you, you pass to me, we go over here. That's kind of the latter thing. I think the ideal is what Ross had just said, was like, here is the playbook. Here is
Not
the
too detailed. Yes, not too detailed.
Here
Just,
it is.
yeah.
Here's the big bullet points.
Yeah.
And then what I want creativity and variation within that.
Yeah.
And then moreover, what I want is creativity and variation in potential additions
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
it.
And changes to it. Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah,
should be
like,
living. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, right? So it's like a recipe, right? Like, hey, here you go, reps. Here's your like flour, water, and salt. Figure it out. Versus, this is how we make muffins, right? And then there's a section in it which is like, do you want to put some sort of filling in here that sounds particularly like what's in season right now? That sounds like, or did you see something interesting? Figure that out, right? Like, oh, hey, I got an idea. What about doing this in order to present them better? That's a really great idea. Let's add that to the recipe doc. And so I think that's the way that I approach that. And so the earlier you can have like a playbook that is like bulleted out even in an MVP fashion, the sooner you're going to start like adding more bullets to it.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing too that came to mind with this, that just reminded me of what you're talking about, Pete, in this question is, I think with the, hey, every rep's opinion, when we have sales processes and they're really junior managers or first time leaders, I think they really struggle with saying confidently, hey, this is the thing I want my team to do, because they're worried that they're going to tell some of the top reps or other people the wrong thing, because they don't get to have that confidence of seeing the impact of something like this. because maybe hey, I was the top rep and I didn't necessarily do what everyone else is doing, but they don't understand that your goal is to try to get everyone to sell like you were. That's why you were probably promoted. That's why you were the top performer. You're doing the right things. How do you help everyone else do that? And it's the same issue that I see when reps can't have these type of conversations with their customers around making recommendations. Like,
Yes.
the junior reps, similar to junior managers, are telling the customer, hey, this is what I think we should do. Hey, what do you want to do next? All this stuff. And that's the same thing you see from managers who don't say, this is generally what we're going to do. I know deals are
Ross,
different. Exactly.
My recommendation here, what we found with our most successful customers, what we found with my most successful reps here.
Yeah.
You see right here, see it, the ones with the higher win rates right there.
This is what they do.
On the little the Atrium report right here. See these guys, like, I'm not making this up. Yeah, I think that, like, and in fairness, managers are woefully under-resourced and under-trained,
yes,
as compared to where they ought to be. And this is so, this is one of the reasons why we started Atrium, is we kind of saw two problems in the market. One is managers are not enabled from a muscles standpoint. Like, they're promoted reps, they're promoted SDRs, etc. And then all the enablement resources go to reps, like from onboarding or objection handling or coaching or whatever. Like, your first sales enablement people or two sales enablement people are going to be working on the reps. And then moreover, most tooling is for reps, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we started Atrium, was to help managers have something that is very specifically for them to use data and metrics to improve rep performance and team performance. And then but then the other thing that we do too is, if you have managers who can't, are afraid to have a performance conversation with a rep.
This is the thing that resonates the most with me, by the way. I feel like, I don't know if this is one of the things where I'm just the aberration, or maybe sometimes customers or potential customers have that thing in their mind. Being able to facilitate that conversation with the rep
totally
is the biggest freaking thing that I would.
I mean, we get a lot of people saying that. We're just like, oh man, I've always had a spidey sense about what's going on with this rep, but now I can literally see it right here, and it actually unblocks me from being afraid of having this conversation. Oh, well, Ross, the reason why you're saying that is because you're an asshole. It's no, I'm literally looking at your win rate. I mean, I'm an asshole for other reasons, but not for this reason right here. Look at your win rate compared to everybody else. Look at your conversion. Your win rate out of proposal is way lower than everybody else's. This is not my opinion. Let's figure it out and fix it. But even if even when people see the information in data, oftentimes there's a disconnect for having that conversation. And so this is one of the reasons why we actually work. There's a gentleman named Richard Harris who's a phenomenal sales coach and sales management coach. And so we just actually have him do sales management trainings for all of our customers. And we invite prospects too, on a monthly basis. Because we're hey, look, if the market is not going to sufficiently train managers in order to have performance conversations, to talk about performance improvement, to talk about career development stuff, all those other things outside of the the nerdery of metrics and what have you.
I love that idea. Let's steal that.
Yeah, and maybe it's
in our own way. Yeah, it's probably
it's not expensive too. I mean, Richard's not cheap, but but it's also one of those things where it's and so as a result, what can happen is, and I think actually maybe we can drop the link in the chat here. And if anyone's interested in joining the next one, it's for sales managers and SDR managers. It's good. I think there's another kind of question here, but from John. How do you think about battle cards, sales blockers, playbooks? Do you incorporate or keep separate, branching playbooks, etc.? It's a really interesting question. Ross, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because they're kind of these two sides of, quote unquote, the sales playbook, what you want reps to be working on. I think one, and I would say probably the 70%, 80% in my mind, is what are the steps, stages, milestones that your rep and your customers are working through? Really the customer facing stuff that you're setting expectations. Hey, this is how usually we do it. These are the meetings we need to have. These are the success criteria. These are the people that need to be involved. And then there's the internal side. There's, hey, what's our objection handling best practices when these things come up? There is what are our internal workflows? Maybe we partner with sales engineers or architects. Maybe we partner with, compliance or risk, et cetera, if we're in the financial tech space. And I think it's really hard to combine both, right? It's really hard to be thinking about both hey, what am I doing with the customer? And then what is the internal stuff? What we've done with Cord is kind of mixed internal steps. You can't necessarily do this on Google Docs or Sheets or Asana. You can kind of click and make something internal. So you can be like, oh, at this stage, these are the things that we need to be thinking about on our side that we don't want to expose to the customer because A, it has nothing to do with them. B, we don't want to add complexity to the deal for them. These are things that we need to be thinking about. Outside, if you're not using something like Accord, then I would say it's going to be hard to get your team to be thinking like we talked about before, right? Are they going to pause and be like, where's the battle card in this conversation? Or should I be thinking about this kind of stuff? That's where I think outside of documented in something, kind of next level, like our software, I would say that the best way of probably doing this, you're probably limited to very long Google Docs or Sheets with best practices that you're going through with your team. Would probably recommend, it seems like the hardest thing to schedule, but that weekly, bi-weekly best practice sharing. And how do you get that FAQ in there so someone can control F and find when they're coming up against that call or something like that. But that's as good as I think it gets when it comes to objection handling. But Pete, I'm sure you've thought a lot more about this than I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think so one is content capture, right? Like getting it down. Because often, cause what we've been talking about, like as relates to Accord, is declaring and getting down the steps. But then just because you have the steps doesn't mean that that's the content, right? Like there's more, there's words and images and so on and so forth. And that doesn't go in Accord or Asana or fill in the blank. So what my recommendation is there, and I'm a former product marketer, so my sales team gives me shit constantly about, they're just like, Pete, you just emit slides, just here's a slide. Oh, that there's been an objection that's come up 3 times. Great, slide. There you go, slide, right? And so one, just getting quick at declaring that content, because you'd be shocked. Oh, it has to be pretty, et cetera, et cetera. It's no, 5 bullets, right? Just create a document, right? Create a slide where it's 5 bullets. Then, so now that you actually have that, in your Google, your Google Slides or whatever, now you got a hyperlink. So now maybe what we do is, if you have Guru or Speckit or something like that, now you create a card on that. And again, it's just hyperlink to this, right? Put a screenshot in that bad boy. Again, it can be super, super MVP, because literally all we're trying to do is get it out of the ether into a minimum viable format. And then now you've got a hyperlink on that, right? You've got a document, right? Like a little card document or whatever. So now you can imagine then hyperlinking from maybe the Accord or your, what have you. And I think my feedback there would be saying hey, getting this stuff out of people's brains, a good example of this, email templates, right? Even if you just have a massive Google Doc with a bunch of different email templates, having even bookmark anchors in there. So now what you can do is you can hyperlink from whatever, or more of a, not just hyperlink from another document, but if someone's oh, I'm trying to find the XYZ email template and I can't find it, someone can be oh yeah, you goofball, it's right here, here's the anchor link, bink, and they're right there, right? So I think that those are some of the biggest things that I would think about there. Just kind of changing gears a little bit here. I wonder if you kind of have a perspective on modifications that people might be thinking about to their sales organizations and how they sell in light of an economic slowdown, potential demand kind of getting softer, et cetera, et cetera. I know that we have a lot of our customers have come to us and asked us around how they can use analytics to be kind of smarter about that and what have you. And I'll kind of talk about that later. But what have you seen as kind of things that folks should be thinking about around selling and managing sales organizations in a economic tightening?
Yeah, I think one key kind of theme philosophy that I've seen change, and I think obviously the impact is going to be very different based on your product, your customers, all that kind of stuff. But one thing that I think holds true is the shift to operational efficiency and overgrowth, as like the shifting of gears from, like, if there was a scale and on this side you have 0 and it's operational efficiency, on this side you have 10, it's growth. I think we're at probably at 12. It's like, it doesn't freaking matter what it costs.
More bodies, more humans.
You're hiring more people because you're increasing quota and you're spending way more marketing. You're doing everything possible that does not make any sense whatsoever, because you're raising millions and millions of dollars and you think you can do that in the next 12, 18 months as well to bring in revenue. I think where we're already seeing it is the right shift, which is to, hey, what are our, from the top of the funnel, how much does it cost us to have a potential conversation or get a new email? How much does it cost to convert that potential conversation and email to an actual sales qualified lead? Then what does it take to get that to an actual opportunity that's qualified? Then what does it take to close? And I think how I would be thinking about it if I was, a sales leader or rep would be, what are the things that I can do in each of those pieces of the funnel to make it more efficient? How can we move our, 10% conversion from MQL to SQL, to 15%? How can I move that SQL qualification rate to deal from 20 to 25%? And that's the way that I would be looking at my business, and then get really tactical of, specific things. What's our response time for this? Okay, what are we saying on these calls? And really drill down. And then now everything that we just talked about, operationalize that in a way that you're actually going to see that change. But that's kind of where my mind goes, is we're going to have to do more with less. We're going to have fewer things coming through the funnel, and we're going to have to improve everything by like 25 to 50% if we're not going to see a massive impact in our business.
Yeah, more with less, I think, is exactly the right thing there. And so all that means, though, is like better like process excellence. So when I think about like sales process, what that indicates, like it was funny. I was talking with our AEs the other day, and I was like, "What do you think it costs to like create an op?" And there's like a lot of blank stares. It's like, come on, where do ops come from? Oh, they come from marketing. Oh, okay. Well, how many marketers do we have? Oh, we have this many. Cool. Are they free or do they cost money? Right? Oh, I guess they have salaries. Yeah, they do. Right? How many SDRs do we have? Oh, we have this many. Oh, okay, cool. How many opportunities do they create in a month? We have a pretty efficient SDR team because we're pretty good at outbound. But still, it's just like, yeah, divide it out. And we're like, whoa, an op is like $500. It's like, yeah, right. So you should be thinking about it like this precious little thing, right? That just got handed to you. It's like, here's this $500 thing, this $500 Fabergé egg. If you drop it on the ground and it breaks because you didn't follow the sales playbook,
do the most possible. How can there be the fewest minutes in between everything? How can there be the most custom, like going back to, how can we have this smooth process so we can wow this person with what we're sharing with them? If you have a sales-led motion, if you have reps on the other side of it early in the process, to be like, wow, I just talked to this guy at Atrium and he just totally understood exactly what I was working on. The top 2 or 3 things that are, on the top of our mind, he's helped other people solve this. And you're not going to have those types of conversations unless you have the open mind and space to think about exactly what you're doing, what you're on. So kind of that's what we're thinking about, right? That's what we're thinking about, is how can we
so I think there's more with less on an op basis, but then as a manager and as a leader, it's also more with less from a human basis as well, right? So like the historical, the last like 2 or 3 years have been like, yeah, just hire more bodies. Well, if they're doing 20K of bookings a month, that doesn't seem so great. Just hire more, just hire more reps, right? Versus, hey, how can we get our reps to 40, 50, 60, 80K of bookings per month? Oh, well, like the reps are having 7 customer facing meetings a week. Interesting. What are they doing with the other 25 hours in the week there, right? So really focusing in on, are we getting the level of efficiency that we want out of our existing sales team? And then if we're not, how do we force rank and say, hey, do we actually need to compress and say, you know what, we overhired the number of reps that we have, right? And we actually need less. And so we need to exit some folks. Or alternatively, hey, before we hire more reps, Let's get
we
these
get to the next
existing
level.
ones to
Yep.
high, like full, like if your reps are not having 20 customer facing meetings a week, you have slack, right? Like 20 is probably at the top, right? Like that's like reps are like running in circles at that point, like, you know, sprinting to the bathroom between
Yeah,
calls, right?
15. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. But like that's like kind of the upper bound. um and actually, in fairness, we would see this with some of our organizations, some of our customers, is like you'd have folks who would have like, you know, very, very, very high meeting counts, and they'd be overloaded, and then you'd look at their number of untouched opportunities, and it was like atrocious, right? And the funny thing was, is like if each of those opportunities, those untouched opportunities, is like a $500 Fabergé egg that's just kind of like sitting there on the ground, like waiting for someone to like trip over it and crush it, like that's bad. Like that's a bunch of like, you know, money that marketing has put into creating those. And so, you know, when you think about more with less, that's the case with individuals as well. As like, we've got these humans that we pay salary expense to, we got to get them to full productivity. If you have somebody who's at full productivity from like, you know, customer facing meeting volume or opportunity loading value standpoint, but the win rate's not there, right? Like those ops could be going somewhere else. So either A, we have to figure out how to fix this person,
Yeah.
and like where the hitch in their giddy up is, like, are they not getting things out of disco? Are they not getting things out of, you know, demo? Are they not getting things out of proposal? Like where's the hitch in their giddy up? One, and like let's intervene and let's fix that, because guess what? Like we can't have somebody who's at partial productivity just sitting around like taking up a seat. Or alternatively, if they're not going to make it, then we need to like quickly get them out of the organization and get them somewhere else where they're going to be more effective, but certainly get somebody else into their seat who's going to be effective, or redirect those $500 ops that they're consuming to somebody who's going to be more effective, right? And it sounds a little draconian, but like that's what we're here to do. Is we turn, as startups, like we turn salary expense into either A, code if you're an engineer, or B, we turn salary expense into bookings.
Yeah, and
Right?
the way I think about that is like, as a seller, at the end of the day, you are responsible for all of the hard work that engineering, product, design, you know, everyone that's invested in the company, like that, all of that work and effort and energy is going into the conversation you're having with a customer. And yes, like you said, it sounds a bit harsh, but like if there's other people or other ways of making that more efficient, of all of those resources coming in, you need to make sure that's maximized, because it's not just the 500, like the way I think about it, it's not just the $500. It is the tens of thousands, hundreds, millions of dollars that the company has
Opportunity
invested in to
cost.
get to this point. And
Oh, right. Even before, yes.
it comes down to that point, right? Like you have this
Like
product that's in marketing, all this kind of
you're
stuff.
the rep. You're like on the tip of this rocket.
Yes, it's the whole, not whatever it is, it's all come to this point, and the difference in a few percentage points is massive in terms of the conversion from that lead to the op and op to close and all that kind of stuff, that it does need to be. That's why sales is an intense job. That's why these people get probably paid the most at, you know, a lot of companies. That's why they get paid literally the most of anyone there, if you're doing a great job, or if you're even hitting the quota. And that's why you do have high turnover, I think. And I think it makes a lot of sense. There's obviously you know, bad things within there that doesn't make sense that people do, but I think overall it makes sense that, hey, all of this money is being invested into these conversations, and if you're not measuring it, and that's why I like love the idea with Atrium, and even being able to have like these conversations with the reps of helping them understand how that's happening, and where they either need to improve or where it's just not going to work, unfortunately. So yeah.
Yeah. Stacy's got a question here. Any tips or words of wisdom for a new SaaS company, new to market, sales team of one, no sales team yet? Sales cycle seems to be taking way too long. Trying to dissect our sales process and messaging, understand what we're doing right or wrong, how to get customers across the finish line and accelerate sales cycles. I mean, I think my reaction to that would be, this feels like something where you're going to have to like jump in with both feet there and like run some sales processes, like run some ops, like be fully in it. Because I think it says sales team of one here. My take on this is that like this feels like a sales motion that like still needs to be created. And so the only way to kind of create a sales motion is to run a bunch of ops yourself, right? And like, rather than trying to do it, from an offset situation, right? Instead, just like being in the deals, because it sounds like the recipe is still being baked, if you will here. Ross, what do you would like to add?
100%. And how do you do that? You need to have more conversations. You need to have as many conversations in a compressed time with who you think are the potential customers, and you just see which ones go the furthest and have the most energy to actually close. And you need to take pricing, not to say that you should have a price, you should have a price, but pricing out of the equation in terms of something super simple that if you solve their problem, they'd pay. Take all those things out of the equation, be like, how do I get this type of person, if it's the right persona, to say yes? And you need to have the fun, you need to have things coming in to figure out what that is. Is it a big launch that you can, manufacture? Is it a bunch of intros you can get from folks in your network, or whoever it is? That's what we did to iterate to figure out our sales process. So we did our big early on, like when we barely had a product, like our big seed round announcements, and worked super hard to get that in TechCrunch so that we got this inflow of leads, and we learned a bunch from that. Had some customers close, some not. Okay, what do we learn from that? We did the next thing, this big product hunt launch. We did a launch on Hacker News with YC. Like, how do you have these moments so you can get an influx of opportunities to learn from? And like Pete said, really dig into, because it's the big thing that's blocking your company right now. I mean, we were proved wrong on so many assumptions from especially the inbound related things. Like when people hear about you that don't already know you, and what do they say, and what do you see from those conversations? We're very different than our first 9 months of building out the product and hiring the team and trying to have sales conversations with people that were in our network. So trying to get those more objective conversations going, I think is probably the right path there.
Yeah, totally. One thing I was gonna kind of ask about here.
Just let Cheryl's comment.
Oh, I know, Cheryl talking about your SDR team.
I hope it was a nice conversation.
I'm sure it was delightful. I'm sure it was consultative and wonderful. I think one thing that I think is top of mind for a lot of organizations right now, especially around kind of like getting to more efficiency, is like you've got a lot of organizations are now distributed or have distributed sales organizations. I mean, but not through like intentionality. Usually it's like, a bunch of people like went to a distributed organization at the beginning of COVID, and kind of like, oh, we got this going on now, and like maybe they've grown or whatever, kind of like, tripped into it. And so I think that that folks are struggling with that, especially in an efficiency centric situation where like hire. Now you got like all these distributed reps might be at a partial efficiency. What are like some of the things that you've seen around kind of like helping, make those reps be more coordinated, help them be more effective in a remote selling environment?
Yeah, one thing that we weren't doing before that I think is helpful is spending more time with the team together without like necessarily set agenda, like kind of going back to what we were saying around how do you like figure out what the objections are, what the battle cards are, and all that kind of stuff. I think you need, sorry, the chat's distracted me. Might want to wait a minute after.
No, Cheryl's doing some live coaching right now. It's fantastic.
This is why we're here on the Power Hour.
I think the thing that I've found is that like, look, I am not a huge fan of distributed sales organizations.
Okay, you guys are in the office. What I was gonna say is, how do you kind of, like how do we get together? We do 30 minutes daily. I think having like an hour or two of like, hey, we're going to talk about what we're seeing. We're going to go through these different opportunities and just have that flexibility space, because I know you guys do in person, and I think that's fantastic, especially with sales when you're all doing the same type of thing, which is very rare in an organization, right? Like engineers are going to be, maybe you're working on a project with someone, but like you're doing a thing that's going to be something different. With sales, it's you're all working on the same kind of thing.
Together. Yeah, I mean, the big thing that I've kind of found that, like, I'm not a huge fan of them, but however, it is inarguable. Like the recruiting benefits of a distributed organization are just like are inarguable. You are a liar if you say that it doesn't help you recruit. It doesn't help you recruit better, because all of a sudden, like, you have this like much larger talent pool. That said, you are also a liar if you think that it doesn't have like negative impacts associated with like organic learning, esprit de corps, right? Like motivation, et cetera. That's just intellectually dishonest, right? And the question is the juice worth the squeeze? I think the juice is worth the squeeze. And then moreover, what are the things that you can do in order to make the squeeze like a little less problematic? And I think the big things that we've found there is, I mean, obviously with Atrium, we look at this through like a data lens and through a metrics lens, is helping organizations just be more aware of what's going on. Like the managers need to be more aware. And so what that means is like a faster cycle time on kind of like metrics awareness. It's not like, hey, let's like look at things at the end of the month. It's like, no, like what we have to be paying attention to is metrics on a, maybe if it's an SDR team, on an every morning basis, like how much activity happened yesterday, how much where are we at this week in terms of activity levels, and then where are we at, this week with respect to outputs, like opportunity creation, and then how are we tracking with respect to that, for the month, for instance, right? Like, and having that show up on a daily basis, not just to the managers, but also to the reps as well, because like that's essentially a digital fill-in for the buzz of the sales floor, like where you're just walking around and like, wow, everyone's on like, it's loud in here. Everyone's like, people are giving high fives for opportunity creation. The same is true in AE land as well. I think there's also a cultural component to it as well. I'm pretty negative on the like, let's have lots of dashboards up on the walls, right? And let's have lots of dashboards up on the walls because we because people will actually look at them. No one ever looks at them. It's like absolutely like it's hilarious. It's like a joke, right? Like no one actually looks at those things. But the thing that it does do is it sets the tone.
Yeah.
It says like, you know what, we are here, like we are accountable to these things right here. And like they are not the things that we're going to look at, because if you think that's the case, you're lying to yourself. But we will look at these things in our one-on-ones, and we will have a bunch of metrics in our sales team meeting and our SDR meeting and what have you. And because like my ass is accountable to our board, right, and to our CEO about the outputs of these metrics, and so you're going to be accountable for these as well. And so if you can take that and you can permeate that in a digital capacity, so making sure that that stuff is broadcasting on Slack, making sure that it's being woven into your operating rhythm, et cetera. It's just essentially just like what do the kids call it? A vibe, right? Just making sure that you got a vibe going.
Call it a vibe, not just
I can call it a vibe. It's a data-driven vibe. I think that's extremely important,
I completely agree. And I just want to make, we got 3 minutes, but I love this.
Oh, Eric,
question.
Eric has a sick question here.
Question. Yeah. I'll quickly read it out. So I really like making a cord field mandatory before moving to a later stage. That's a best practice that we need to make more common.
Put it in your customer success
onboarding
accord,
playbook.
Your onboarding playbook. Yeah.
Genius to drive adoption and avoid the manager saying you lost this deal. Why didn't you have it? Because you want to be proactive. Exactly. 2, one thing I love about Accord is providing a pathway for lower performing reps to replicate what top performers are doing. Yeah. Helping make sure you're sharing that. Question: how often do you review maps with reps to make sure they aren't missing opportunities and gaps with the op?
It's an interesting question. Like we don't go through Accords in pipe review, but I think it's like one of those things where what's the TV show?
I think Sean does with your team. I don't know about you, but I think Sean does.
No, we don't go through the Accords. We go through we run pipe review out of Atrium's op views.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is if there's it's like enhance, it's like from like CSI, like enhance, like zoom in. If there's a situation where like, let's double click on that, right? Rather than it being like story time, it's like you click through and then like now you're in the very detailed, like, okay, we're actually at this step right here and this step right here. Oh, why haven't you done the executive touch? And like, oh, you haven't done this? Ooh, okay, I think we have an action item. I'm glad we found that. Right? Like that's how I wouldn't like run, because a mutual action plan or like sales playbook, like every single op, it has a bunch of different steps in it. So that probably sounds like that would be a pretty heavy,
maybe more like the one-on-one type situation. Hey, what are the 3 things that you're working on right now that could help unblock? Let's go through. Okay, these are the most active ones. Shit, it looks like this didn't happen. Were we able to get the decision maker in? Oh no, like, did we do do we have this opportunity now, or do we miss it? Okay, for next time, we definitely need to make sure
Yeah, that's how, I mean, that's how I would that's how I would approach that. In general, like from an operating rhythm standpoint, I always like starting it at like a more what's the opposite of granular? Like more high
Macro.
level. Yeah, more macro, like a more macro level. And then when something smells funny, what you do is you like da-dunk, like you click in, right? And like, you know, whether you're talking about on a deal by deal basis, which is like obviously where something like an Accord helps out, or if you're talking about it like at a rep level, where it's like, hey, I'm getting like, you know, I'm seeing these like output metrics issues here, or like maybe some deteriorating input metrics. Now let's like get into it and like actually do like a full kind of like body scan on the rep to kind of see what's going on. But you do that as a result of something being kind of like, I'm kind of getting alerted to this. Great
That works well.
question there, Eric. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
Wonderful. Well, guess what? Shocking. We're out of time. Super fun as always. Not surprising. Um, Ross, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody else, I really appreciate it. Next week we got Terry Long, who's the VP of Sales Enablement at CB Insights. She's badass. I think we'll drop the link here in the chat, but she's absolutely fantastic. And I'm really excited about it because I don't know a ton about sales enablement, but she knows a ton about sales enablement, and I'm really looking forward to spending time with her and learning more. So Ross, I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course, Pete. Thanks for having me. I wrote down a lot of notes actually for us to start doing some things. So learned a lot as well. Thanks
Nice.
for hosting. All right.
Cool. Later, guys.